let me ask you something. If I told you there was a single intervention, not a drug, not a supplement, not some expensive procedure, that could add a decade of healthy, functional life to your lifespan, would you take it seriously? What if I told you that most people have access to it right now, it costs almost nothing, and the research behind it is about as ironclad as anything we have in medicine? You'd probably think I was selling something. I'm not. What I'm talking about is exercise, but not just any exercise. I'm talking about a very specific, evidence-based approach to training that is designed not just to make you look better or feel better in the short term, but to fundamentally slow the biological clock at the cellular level. I've spent years going deep into the longevity literature. I've talked with some of the world's leading researchers on aging, muscle physiology, cardiovascular health, and metabolic function. And what I've come to believe, and I say believe because medicine is always probabilistic, never certain, is that the biggest lever most people can pull to extend their health span is getting their exercise prescription right. Not just doing some exercise, but doing the right exercise at the right intensity, in the right combination, with the right recovery strategy. That's what we're going to break down today. This is going to be a long one. I want you to stay with me because I'm going to give you the full picture, the why, the what, and the how. By the end of this, you'll have a complete framework for building a workout routine that is specifically designed to fight aging. Not aging as a cosmetic concern, but aging as the progressive loss of physical capacity, metabolic health, cognitive sharpness, and ultimately independence. So let's start with what aging actually is, at least from a physical standpoint, because I think that context matters enormously when we talk about exercise selection. When most people think about getting older, they think about wrinkles, gray hair, maybe some aches and pains. But what's actually happening beneath the surface is a cascade of biological changes that, left unaddressed, gradually strip away your ability to function. One of the most significant of these changes is the loss of muscle mass. Starting somewhere in your mid-30s, if you're not actively doing something to counter it, you begin losing skeletal muscle at a rate of roughly 1 to 2% per year. By the time you're in your 60s and 70s, that cumulative loss, a process called sarcopenia, can be catastrophic. It's not just about strength. It's about metabolic rate, glucose disposal, fall prevention, and frankly, survival. Studies consistently show that low muscle mass is one of the strongest predictors of early mortality. That's not a minor detail. That's a headline. But muscle loss is only part of the story. Cardiovascular fitness, specifically what we measure as VO2 max, your maximal oxygen uptake, also declines with age, typically at about 10% per decade after your 20s in sedentary individuals. And VO2 max is one of the most powerful predictors of all-cause mortality we have. I've said this before and I'll keep saying it, the data on VO2 max and longevity are stunning. If you take someone in the bottom quartile of cardiorespiratory fitness for their age and sex and compare them to someone in the top quartile, the difference in mortality risk is larger than almost any other modifiable risk factor we study. Larger than smoking in some analyses. Let that sink in. Then you have bone density, which also declines with age, particularly in women after menopause, but in men too, leading to osteoporosis, fractures, and again, a dramatically elevated mortality risk. A hip fracture in a 75-year-old is not a minor inconvenience. It is a life-altering event with a 1-year mortality rate that rivals many cancers. And beyond the structural and cardiovascular changes, you have the metabolic deterioration, the declining insulin sensitivity, the accumulating visceral fat, the mitochondrial dysfunction. Your cells literally become less efficient at producing energy. That has downstream effects on everything from your physical performance to your cognitive function. Now here's where it gets important. Every single one of those things, muscle mass, VO2 max, bone density, insulin sensitivity, mitochondrial function, every single one of them is profoundly modifiable by exercise. Not partially modifiable, profoundly modifiable. And that is an extraordinary statement. We don't have a drug that does all of that. We don't have a supplement that even comes close. Exercise is genuinely the most powerful anti-aging intervention we have, and yet most people either don't do it at all, or they do it in a way that's leaving enormous amounts of benefit on the table. So what does the right exercise prescription look like? Let me walk you through what I think of as the 4 pillars of an anti-aging fitness program, and then we'll get into the specific protocols. The first pillar is Zone 2 cardio. If you've followed my work for any length of time, you've heard me talk about Zone 2 training extensively, and I make no apologies for that because I think it is the most underutilized and misunderstood component of fitness for most people. Zone 2 is a specific intensity of aerobic exercise. It corresponds roughly to a heart rate where you can still hold a conversation, but you're working, you feel it, and you couldn't sustain a full, comfortable conversation for long. If you use a lactate meter, which is the most precise way to identify it, Zone 2 is typically the highest intensity at which your blood lactate stays below or around 2 millimoles per liter. You're working aerobically, your mitochondria are humming along, you're oxidizing fat efficiently. Why does Zone 2 matter so much for aging? Because it is the primary stimulus for mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria, and for improving mitochondrial efficiency. Remember when I mentioned mitochondrial dysfunction as one of the hallmarks of cellular aging? Zone 2 training is one of the most potent counters to that dysfunction we know of. When you do enough Zone 2 work over time, you're essentially renovating the energy infrastructure of your cells. You're increasing the density and the quality of mitochondria in your muscle cells. That improves everything: your capacity to oxidize fat, your lactate clearance, your endurance, your metabolic flexibility. Zone 2 training also has profound cardiovascular benefits. It improves cardiac output, it lowers resting heart rate, it improves the function of the endothelium, the lining of your blood vessels, in ways that are deeply protective against cardiovascular disease. And because cardiovascular disease remains the #1 killer in most of the developed world, anything that genuinely moves the needle on cardiovascular risk deserves serious attention. How much Zone 2 should you be doing? In an ideal world, and I want to be honest that most people don't live in an ideal world, I'd love to see people accumulating 3 to 4 hours of Zone 2 per week. That sounds like a lot, and it is a significant time commitment. But here's the thing: Zone 2 is sustainable. It's not punishing. You can carry on a partial conversation, you can listen to a podcast, you can enjoy the outdoors. It doesn't have to be miserable. Many people do it as walking with a weighted vest, cycling, rowing, swimming, or using an elliptical. The modality matters far less than the intensity. As long as you're in that Zone 2 window, the mitochondrial adaptation occurs regardless of whether you're on a bike or a treadmill. If 3 to 4 hours feels completely out of reach right now, start with 40, 5 minutes 3 times a week, and build from there. The dose-response relationship for Zone 2 cardio is real, but it's also forgiving. More is generally better, but something is dramatically better than nothing. The second pillar is VO2 Max Training. This is distinct from Zone 2, and it serves a completely different purpose. Where Zone 2 is about building your aerobic base and your mitochondrial health from the ground up, VO2 Max Training is about raising the ceiling, pushing your maximal aerobic capacity as high as it can go. And as I mentioned earlier, VO2 Max is one of the single strongest predictors of longevity we have. VO2 Max Training lives at the opposite end of the intensity spectrum from Zone 2. These are high-intensity intervals performed at or near your maximum aerobic effort. The classic protocol that exercise physiologists have studied extensively is something like 4 by 4 intervals. 4 minutes of work at close to your maximal effort, followed by 4 minutes of active recovery, repeated 4 times. It's brutal in the moment, but you're only doing this type of training once, maybe twice a week at most. The recovery demands are significant, and you don't want to overdo it. What exactly happens physiologically when you do VO2 max training? You're stressing your cardiovascular system to its upper limits. You're forcing your heart to pump blood as fast and efficiently as it can. Over time, with consistent training, your stroke volume increases, meaning your heart ejects more blood with each beat. Your cardiac output improves, and your muscles become better at extracting oxygen from the blood. All of that translates to a higher VO2 max, and because every unit increase in VO2 max is associated with a reduction in mortality risk, this training is not just about athletic performance. It is a genuine longevity intervention. For people who are earlier in their fitness journey, I want to be clear, you should build a substantial Zone 2 base before doing a lot of high-intensity work. Don't skip the foundation. Zone 2 builds the aerobic infrastructure that allows your body to recover from hard efforts and adapt to them productively. Jumping straight into hard intervals without an aerobic base is a recipe for poor adaptation and elevated injury risk. But once you have that base, incorporating 1 to 2 VO2 max sessions per week is enormously powerful. The third pillar, and I would argue this is the most important one for pure longevity, when you think about functional independence in old age, is strength training. Specifically, resistance training designed to build and maintain muscle mass and functional strength across the major movement patterns of the human body. We talked about sarcopenia earlier, and I want to come back to it because I don't think most people genuinely appreciate how serious it is until it's already causing problems. The loss of muscle mass with aging isn't just a cosmetic issue or even just a strength issue. Muscle is a metabolically active organ. It is the primary site of glucose disposal in your body. When you eat carbohydrates, the majority of that glucose goes into your muscle cells for storage or use. When you lose muscle, your capacity to handle glucose declines, your insulin sensitivity worsens, and you start down a road toward metabolic dysfunction that can eventually manifest as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and all of the complications that follow. Beyond metabolism, muscle mass and strength are the difference between someone who, at 80 years old, can get up off the floor without assistance, carry their groceries, climb stairs, and live independently, and someone who can't. The research on grip strength, leg strength, and functional capacity in older adults is consistent and sobering. The people who maintain muscle strength into advanced age maintain their independence and quality of life in ways that simply cannot be replicated by any pharmaceutical intervention. So, what does an effective strength training program look like for anti-aging? I want to talk about this carefully because there's a lot of confusion in this space. Some people think that lifting weights is for young athletes and that older people should stick to light resistance bands and chair exercises. That's a mistake. The research is very clear that older adults respond to resistance training, including heavy compound movements, just as well as younger adults in terms of relative strength and muscle gains. The biology of muscle adaptation doesn't stop working because you're 60 or 70. It's slower, it requires more attention to recovery, but it absolutely works. The movements I think everyone should have in their program, regardless of age, center around the fundamental human movement patterns. Hip hinging, squatting, pushing, pulling, and loaded carries. These aren't arbitrary categories. They reflect the demands of real, world physical function. Deadlifts and Romanian deadlifts train the hip hinge pattern and build the posterior chain. Your hamstrings, glutes, and lower back, which are critical for everything from picking something up off the floor to maintaining good posture. Squats in their various forms train the legs and hips in a pattern that mirrors getting up and down from a seated position. Pressing movements, bench press, overhead press, develop upper body pushing strength. Pulling movements, rows, pull-ups, lat pull-downs, develop the back and biceps and are particularly important for posture as we age. When the tendency is toward forward rounding, and loaded carries, literally picking something heavy up and walking with it, are one of the most functional, full body strength and stability exercises in existence, and they're criminally underused. For most people, I'd recommend 2 to 3 strength training sessions per week, hitting the full body in each session or splitting across upper and lower body. The key variables to get right are progressive overload, meaning you need to be consistently challenging your muscles with increasing demands over time, whether that's more weight, more reps, or more difficulty, and sufficient recovery between sessions. Muscle grows during recovery, not during the workout itself. That's worth remembering. One specific thing I want to flag for anyone over 40, and especially over 50, eccentric strength training deserves special attention. Eccentric strength is the strength you express while a muscle is lengthening, the controlled lowering phase of a movement. Research has shown that eccentric strength declines faster with age than concentric strength, and that it's particularly important for fall prevention. When you slip, your body uses eccentric muscle contractions to catch itself. Training these movements deliberately, slowing down the lowering phase of your lifts, incorporating exercises like Nordic hamstring curls and eccentric heel drops builds a kind of functional resilience that is very specifically anti-aging. The fourth pillar is what I call stability and structural work, and it encompasses a broad range of training that doesn't fit neatly into the cardio or strength buckets, but is absolutely critical for long-term physical function. This includes mobility work, balance training, and what I think of as the structural integrity of the body, the deep stabilizing muscles, the connective tissue, the joint health. As we age, we tend to lose both mobility, the range of motion of our joints, and proprioception, which is the body's sense of where it is in space. Both of those losses contribute substantially to fall risk, which, as I mentioned, is one of the leading causes of injury and death, triggering events in older adults. A program that builds strength but ignores mobility and balance is leaving a significant gap in the longevity picture. This doesn't have to be complicated. Daily mobility work of 15 to 20 minutes, addressing the hips, thoracic spine, shoulders, and ankles, the areas that tend to stiffen most with age and sedentary living, makes a meaningful difference over time. Single leg exercises in your strength training build balance and on unilateral stability, and practices like yoga, pilates, or even simple standing balance drills can maintain and improve proprioception in ways that matter enormously for everyday function. I also want to mention the pelvic floor and deep core musculature because this is an area that is chronically neglected in mainstream fitness content. The ability to control intra-abdominal pressure to stabilize the spine and pelvis under load is foundational to safe, effective movement. People who have poor deep core function often compensate in ways that lead to chronic pain and injury. Building this deep stability through breathing mechanics, through foundational core exercises, through proper bracing technique in your strength work, protects you as the loads and challenges increase. Now I want to spend some time on something that I think is genuinely underappreciated in the longevity and exercise conversation, and that's the relationship between muscle protein synthesis and aging. Here's the problem: as we get older, we become what researchers call anabolically resistant. That means our muscles become less responsive to the protein we eat and to the resistance training stimulus. A young person who eats 30 grams of protein after a workout will stimulate a robust muscle building response. An older person may need 40 or even 50 grams to get the same response. The machinery is still there, but it needs a stronger signal. This has a direct implication for how older adults should approach both their training and their nutrition. From a training standpoint, it means you may need more volume, more sets per muscle group per week, to generate an adequate stimulus for muscle growth. From a nutrition standpoint, it means protein intake becomes even more critical with age. I generally recommend that people who are serious about maintaining muscle mass aim for around 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass per day, or roughly 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. That's meaningfully higher than the RDA, which was set to prevent deficiency, not to optimize muscle protein synthesis in an aging population.